Hello everyone, I'm Parker. I cover trans news. This week is Trans Awareness Week. And today we are talking about trans murder monitoring. And I will explain what that is. So, Trans Murder Monitoring 2025 reveals new trend in anti-trans violence, systematic targeting of activists and movement leaders. So, this is from TGEU.org. Trans Murder Monitoring is a research project by TGEU that tracks the murders of trans and gender diverse people globally. This project has been active since 2009. To do this, we systematically monitor, collect, and analyze reports of murders to provide a clearer understanding of violence against trans and gender diverse people. Every year, we update the data shortly before Trans Day of Remembrance. So Trans Day of Remembrance is this Thursday, the 20th. To mark the start of Trans Awareness Week 2025, leading up to Trans Day of Remembrance on November 20th, TGEU releases the annual update of its global trans murder monitoring project. This research project has documented the murders of trans and gender diverse people globally since 2009. But new global data from the Trans Murder Monitoring 2025 reveals a dangerous shift. A growing number of murder victims are trans movement leaders and activists. Over the past year, trans activists accounted for 14% of reported murders and are the second most targeted group globally, following sex workers. The year-on-year rise in murders of trans activists shows this is an attempt to silence those fighting for trans rights worldwide. So this was the key findings of the study. 281 trans and gender diverse people were reported murdered between October 1st, 2024 and September 30th, 2025. Since 2009, TGEU's monitoring has now recorded 5,322 murders worldwide. So almost 5,500 murders since they started doing this in 2009. And then it says, because many murders are misreported or omitted, often because of misgendering, stigma, or misreporting in the media, the real number of murders is likely far higher. At the same time, the broader environment of violence against trans communities is intensifying. State-backed anti-trans hostility is both legitimizing violence and weakening human rights protections, leaving trans people increasingly unprotected and exposed. So here are some statistics from this study. Sex workers remain the most targeted group of all known occupations. So sex workers made up 34% of these murders. There's a notable rise in murders of activists and movement leaders, who are the second most targeted group by occupation this year, accounting for 14% of cases, which is up from 9% last year. Echoing the patterns of previous years, 90% of reported murders were feminicides, which means victims that are trans women or trans feminine. 88% of victims were Black or brown people. And then age, 24% were 19 to 25, 25% were 26 to 30, 26% were 31 to 40, and 5% were under 18. So there were 31 cases in the United States. 44% of reported murders were shootings, so almost half of them were shootings. 25% of murders occurred on the street, and 22% occurred in the victim's home. As in previous years, Black and trans women of color and trans sex workers are overrepresented among murder victims, which means it's made up of mostly these people. Sex workers being the most targeted of all known occupations. This highlights how misogyny, racism, xenophobia, and whorephobia intersect in deadly ways. So it says cases in North America are back to pre-pandemic levels after climbing to an all-time peak in the last 4 years. I'm going to read a quote from Deekshitha Ganesan, who is the policy manager with TGEU. They said, in the last 2 years, the murders of trans activists and movement leaders have doubled. This rise is a deliberate attempt to silence those defending freedom and equality. These murders are the most extreme consequence of political discourse that dehumanizes trans people. Governments must act now to protect trans human rights defenders and ensure that trans communities can live and organize safely. Every murdered activist represents a silenced community, said Freya Watkins, who's a senior research officer. Governments and institutions must support civil society, harmonize hate crime laws, and decriminalize sex work to stop this violence. So a total of 281 trans and gender diverse people murdered since the 2024 update. Last year, this is a decrease from last year where there was 350. However, this decline does not necessarily signal increased safety. It likely reflects growing invisibility of these murders in media reporting, a trend that may be shaped by changes in search engine and social media algorithms like this one, or widespread media disinterest, which can make murders harder to identify and verify. So that is exactly why I am covering these. In the US right now, we have mainstream media merging powers and controlling our information. Trans murders almost never go reported, especially right now with this authoritarian regime who has seemed to make hurting trans people their agenda. From a recent report I covered last week, we also know that with anti-trans legislation, LGBT suicide rates go up higher. So the results are shockingly clear. Trans people are not a threat, and we cannot afford the threats being made towards us right now. Thank you for listening. I will be back soon with more news. Please like this video, share it, comment. I'll be back soon. Bye, guys.